Hey, what's up? Ken from Palm Beach Dyno here. Welcome to the latest episode of Hit the Brakes, where we sit down with industry leaders and racers and have long conversations. You may not know our next guest, but he started the blower porting craze 20 years ago. He ran SCT at the age of 23. He brought the nGauge to our market and has a host of other impressive accomplishments. Today we sit down with Brian Herron. Well, welcome to Palm Beach Dyno, Brian. It's been a while.
Yeah, thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem. So, obviously, not a lot of people might know your name that listen to my podcast, but I think you're super important to the industry and how we got to this point. And you've had your hands on a lot of products that people touch. They just don't necessarily know that you were involved in them. So I like to start out with, my connection with you, which is back, I believe that was like 2004-ish. Is that about right?
It's been like 20 years, right?
Yeah, 20 years. So if anybody's watched this podcast previously, Jerry Robleski was on. It was my first guest, and that's how I know Brian. And let's talk about how you got into the business itself. Like most people, I believe that you don't really have an automotive education. You have a business background.
Yeah. I mean, I started with, working on my own car, and I was a computer science background. And at some point, the internet came around, right? And some of those early internet forums, there was Modular Fords. I had a small group called MTC where we were just chatting about things like Ford transmissions and doing modifications. And eventually Jerry showed up on scene, and I think we all started to get connected with him and the idea that we could change code in the cars. And at the same time, I'm kind of watching this. I'm starting to modify Thunderbird Super Coupes and getting into the Ford scene. And it just came together really nicely, like because Thunderbirds would blow head gaskets. That was their thing. And so my first repair was the 3.8 liter supercharged engine. They would just keep blowing head gaskets. So I would find these cars with blown head gaskets, put new head gaskets in, and then drive the car. And then it's like everything else, you want to go faster, right? It's like, this is great, but can I have more? And computer tuning was kind of the early days of that, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So Super Coupes was basically where you spent.
That was my first love.
Yeah. Which, I think that's what Jerry was known for. Like in that group, I believe he did the transmission thing was in that group of people, not the Mustang world, obviously eventually came over to that world, but this goes way back. So at what point do you make the jump from, well, let's talk about Apton Performance, right? Was that your first business in this?
Yeah, I was trying to figure out what to do with myself, and I was in college for computer science and learning software programming and realizing maybe it wasn't really for me. And then Apton I wasn't really sure at the beginning what it was going to be. So I wanted to build supercharger kits. I thought Ford Explorers would be a fun arena. And as I'm trying to make that work and trying to do some performance tuning, I realized that superchargers for Ford Lightning, Mustang Cobra, the 0304 had just come out. There was opportunity to get more horsepower by porting those. Mm-hmm. And so pretty quickly, Apton went from a bunch of different small projects to let's port superchargers.
Yeah, and I think that's obviously how I knew about you back then. And something I just was thinking about when you were on your way here, how much blower porting was around at that time? Now it's just super common, right? There's companies, like large companies that specialize in that. We use them for the GT500s, and obviously it's very popular in the GM world as well. But back then there was a little bit here and there in the industry of people doing the M90, M12 Eaton blowers. But I think there was a lot of skepticism, like, does this really work? And so when we got our hands on the porting setup and we started doing testing, we got, I think, Muscle Mustangs and Fast Fords was the first magazine. We brought them in. We said, look, let's put the car on the dyno. Let's run a stock. Let's, as quickly as possible, swap out the supercharger. Let's leave everything else the same day, same dyno, everything else. And let's see what happens. Mm-hmm. And so we ran that test a couple of different ways, and consistently it was like 30 horsepower. That magazine article hit, and then we went from here and there, one or two, to, I remember we had our 500th supercharger porting. It's like, wow, these things are everywhere.
And it just started to kind of grow from there. And you're right, today it's like kind of a common practice, right? Everybody knows you could port the supercharger, but you remember all the snake oil things back then? Like you could do this throttle body and it's 30 horsepower, and you sort of
Yep.
all of these things, and like they never really added up to much. So when you could find something that actually worked and was repeatable and gained horsepower, people just started to follow behind that.
Yeah, I mean, nowadays on the GT500 world, people ask me what's the number one mod, and other than just like a quick pulley change, port the supercharger. It's 100 horsepower or 80 to 100 on a GT500, which
Yeah,
is
that's
already
incredible, right?
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, I showed you some of the cars on your way in here, and we can make 900 wheel on pump gas and 1100 on E85 with the factory supercharger. That's just blows my mind. And when you talk about, originally back then coming up with supercharger kits, I don't think people realize how things were back then compared to how they were now. It was a little bit, even though there was larger companies back then, like the Vortex and Paxtons and all them, they were still fairly rudimentary, I would say.
Yeah, I mean, I remember the base package '03 Cobra. You start to put on the small pulley and like a tune and the basic bolt-ons, and you're maybe like 475. People were barely cracking 500 at the tire. And then we started porting superchargers, and this was before they had other kits that were for that car. But we got to 550. It's like, wow, it's a big difference going from 450 to 550 in a stock configuration. Now it's like at 1,000 horsepower, it's like a totally different game.
Yeah. Oh, it is a totally different game, and I'm not throwing shade at any of our customers that make less power than this. But when we dyno a car and it makes 800, it's just like, it's pretty good, I guess. Like it's just, it's if it's not four digits, it's not even 4 digits is barely exciting anymore. But I say that to make sure everybody currently appreciates how easy it is, and that's not necessarily a good thing, because there's a lot of people building these cars that just can't handle them. We get a lot of customers that wind up having issues on the street, I would say, with wrecking the cars. So maybe back then it was for our own safety that they didn't make quite that kind of power. But fast forward a little bit, at what point did you get into doing anything with calibrations, the computer in the car?
So the whole time I was at Apton, I had a relationship with Jerry that spanned from even before the starting of Apton. And we would go out and do dyno tuning on weekends. I would help support him as he was building calibrations. And I mean, like that whole side of the world was just kind of beginning, the idea of flash tuning ECUs. And I was trying to figure out what my role in that world might be at some point. And the industry hadn't really developed. There was chips at first, right? Remember the JTAG? It's like plug it into the ECU, and you had a chip with switches, and you could flip between. And then, the ECU reprogramming started to come around, and that was kind of really the beginning of my career. Like if I reflect back, ECU reprogramming. Now I do it a lot for repair and vehicle just service, but it's really been one of the foundations. And so as ECU reprogramming started to come to life, I remember I get a call from Jerry one day, and he had started SCT, and I was up at Apton, and he's like, hey, do you want to come down here? We need somebody to run the company. And I'm at 23 years old, and I'm like, well, how could I say no to that? I mean,
Right.
I'll give it a go. And so that was, like I had this Apton business, and I'm like, okay, I have to figure out what to do with this, and at the same hand, I have to pack my life up and move down to Florida and try to run. It wasn't even SCT back then; it was Super Chips Custom Tuning, because they had started as an off-spin of Super Chips. Mm-hmm. That once I got down there and we started working about strategy, it's like, okay, let's build a Flash programmer, let's rebrand the company so it's on its own. And then the supercharging porting business as well. It's like, what do I do with that, right?
Yeah, I remember. It's a long time ago, but if my memory serves me correctly, Jerry called me up and he's like, hey, I got an idea. And I was like, what's that? He's like, you should buy Apton Performance from Brian. And I was like, well, why would he sell Apton Performance? He's like, well, I want him to come run SCT, but he needs to sell the company to kind of close that chapter. I go, I don't have any money to buy a company. And he's like, well, maybe you guys can work out a deal. talk it out. Maybe you can make payments on it or whatever. It's a healthy company, and you can use profits to pay for the business. And I mean, you made it super easy to do for me because, for those people that don't know, a lot of people out there probably know the Stegmeyer name now, but at that time they were the ones that were kind of in the background doing the actual physical porting that you came up with and all that. And I maintained my relationship with them, which we're going to go how that relationship went, but it went well for a while.
Yeah.
And it was definitely a good decision for me to buy the company. And then eventually politics and personalities didn't really mesh very well. And we parted ways with Stegmeyer's, or he actually parted ways with me, to be honest. He thought I was going to cut him out of it, so he cut me out first, and I tried to get somebody else to do it. But honestly, the guy that we got to do it did a visually great job, machine work, but it didn't make as much power as Stegmeyer. And I said to myself, well, if I keep going with this, it's just out of ego and to prove that, like, I could do it without Stegmeyer. But, like, at that point, I had made plenty of money on the deal, and I'm a tuner. That's not my business. It wasn't. So I decided to just, close it at that point or just stop doing it. But it was an awesome deal. I mean, the amount of volume that we had back then, like, we don't even do anywhere near that even today that we were doing back then. And, I think in the original, obviously a lot of guys came out after you that started doing it out of their garages. But in the beginning, there really wasn't a lot of people that could do it, or at least make power doing it. There was probably people trying. So, I don't know. I think there was times we would do like 6 or 10 in a week or something like that, which is crazy. Like, we don't do anywhere near that much now. And that's because there's a lot of different options on the table, just like everything else. But, that was an awesome deal for us. And it kind of exposed me to a different area of business. When I started Modular Depot, there was no flash tuner. Or I think maybe we were using the Super Chips the blue one, the goofy one.
Oh, right, yeah.
But mostly it was chips. I remember I was selling 50 chips a month, and I was like, oh my God, I'm going to be rich, But I was also like one of 5 SCT dealers at the time. So, they couldn't go anywhere else but me. But obviously that's worked out. But so let's go to the SCT thing, because a lot of people, we had Jerry on, and he kind of told the story of SCT, but what part did you play there? I mean, you kind of touched on it, but you were responsible for what, the X2, that starting?
Yeah, it was really at the point in which I entered the business, they were trying to bring engineering in-house to develop products and grow the brand. And if you remember, like, Modular Depot was the original distributor of the Racer Pack. You remember that?
Yeah. We talked about that on Jerry's podcast, and I feel slightly responsible for there being as many good tuners that were born in that.
Yeah, a lot of them came out of that era. And so what SCT was trying to do was to scale, right? How can we get more people to calibrate vehicles? And, putting modifications on cars, you want to calibrate the vehicle so it runs right. So, it's clean on emissions, it follows all of the standards and the safety, and it's a good running car, right? It's not just sort of hacked together. And so the SCT vision was, how do we scale? And, chips didn't scale very well because there was all this, complexity around the ports and if they do and don't work. So flash programming was really it. And so my mission there was to move SCT, A, from super chips to like its own standalone company, and to B, to build technology. So, and we had, software developers building the tuning software. I didn't contribute a lot to that because it was already going, but developing flash tuning product. So the first flash tuner that SCT launched was called the xCalibrator, which was kind of a joke.
I totally skipped over that. The box with the LEDs on it. I forgot about that.
Two buttons and a couple LEDs, and we're trying to figure out how to name this thing. And I think Jerry was the one who's like, it's kind of like an xCalibrator, and so the xCal, like, that was the longhand of it, was the xCalibrator 1. So I found a company who was very familiar with building tuning technology just for loading files. Like, they didn't know anything about what goes in it. They could have loaded an Excel file inside of an ECU. But so I got them to partner with SCT to build the xCalibrator 1. And it was literally like read the stock file out, put the modified file in. The box didn't know what was going in and out. And that was the beginning for SCT of kind of a whole new wave. And early on, it was very clunky. You had to use a serial cable to load tunes into the box. And then it's like, oh, we want USB. We want to have a screen. We want to have a keypad. So then the xCalibrator 2 came out. And then it was, okay, we figured out Ford ECUs. Let's do GM. And, I had this whole plan, like I want to do all of the ECUs and we're going to figure everything out. But a growing company only has so many resources. So like I was constantly throttling back because, hey, we only have so much cash to spend to develop and we can only go so fast, even though we want to take over the world. But that was for me like the beginning, and also like developing myself as a leader, figuring out how to manage people. And the racing and performance industry is quite different than other places I've been. So how do you work with, tuner guys and dyno guys and racing guys and try to build a company that is healthy and growing and has good culture and people want to work at and all of that. So I was almost 2 years at SCT. And when I departed there, it was kind of time for me to move on. I thought that racing and performance was always a really exciting space to be in, but my wife was pregnant. I'm like trying to bring up a family. And I'm thinking I want to go outside of this space for a while. And that's how I ended up. The next chapter was more in the diagnostic and repair side.
So, and I knew you were younger than me, but I didn't realize you were only 23, 24.
Yeah,
when
23, yeah.
Yeah, that's impressive, especially now. Maybe at the time it wasn't, because I was probably like 29 or something like that at that time.
It was scary. I mean,
Looking back now at being almost 50, I'm like, getting a 23-year-old guy running a company like that's pretty impressive,
I appreciate it. When it happened, it was like, you always have to take the opportunity when it comes, right? And just be fearless about it. But I was pretty scared, like, okay, I don't really know what I'm doing. All these challenges are coming up, like HR issues and cash flow issues. And it's like, let's figure this out. And I'm really grateful that I had that opportunity because, that kind of set the tone for me of like, don't be afraid to take risks. And, I think the best way you can grow a company is to design product that customers want and need. And that was like the tuners, like everybody wanted to have a flash tuner. It's like every time you can find an opportunity to build something, I mean, your business is the same way, right? If you see something that's not being served by the market, this is my opportunity to go make something and make a name for myself and build a customer base.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point to bring up, the whole opportunity thing. A lot of people sometimes are like, I wish I had the chance to do that. But a lot of times they do, but they just don't take that leap, I mean, me personally, it's Jerry's kind of, I sometimes call him the puppet master of my life, like he's been part of a lot of the different whys in the road and helping me go certain ways. And he's why I'm in Florida. He got me the job at Diablo Sport, which ultimately wasn't a great job, but I learned a tremendous amount there that most tuners don't know, from the back end and, how the software defines the file, how, the information is stored in the file, and all those sorts of things. And that's why I live in Florida, because of that. So, but just like you at 23, I don't know exactly how old I was. I was probably like 36 or something like that, and Mike Wesley from Diablo Sport hits me up and he's like, hey man, I'm looking for somebody to come in and help my Ford business. And I'm like, are you asking me? And he's like, yeah, I am. I go, why would you ask me? I have a business. He's like, well, Jerry said I should ask you, so I'm asking you.
I don't think you've ever been afraid to jump. I've seen you take on a lot of challenges and you just take it head on.
Yeah, that's a story of my life. They don't always go very well, but sometimes they do, and that's, it sounds like almost ridiculous to bring up, but like I think there's a movie called Yes Man or something like that. I forget who's in it, but the story is the guy's gonna just say yes to everything, see what happens. And I actually somewhat took that advice after I watched that movie. I'm like, maybe that's what I need to do. Like, you can't be in the game unless you try.
I feel like people who have never had like a catastrophic failure or something that they really wish they hadn't done haven't tried enough things, right? Like you have to be like, oh, that didn't work out well. I'm not going to do that one again.
Well, and those failures are what give you the courage to do it again, because when you fail at the moment, you're like, this is the end of my life. And then you get through it and you go, well, you know what? That wasn't that bad, and then it gives you the courage to do it again, and hopefully do it right the next time. So
and like as my career has grown into bigger and bigger companies, like the failures and the risks get bigger, and like you have to sort of overcome them in steps. Like, okay, I thought this was the end of the world and I figured my way through it, because it just gets bigger and bigger, and it's like a comfort level and understanding how to approach those things.
Right. Yeah. I mean, when you're in the moment, sometimes it's hard to really realize the impact of what you're doing. Like, even though it was a big deal for you personally to move to Florida and take over SCT, impact on your life, that was an impact on everybody that's probably watching this podcast life, because, SCT might have not gone the way it went if you weren't involved. I mean, I'm sure they would have done something. But it
might have been different.
It might have been different. So you are part of that, and you are part of many more things, probably devices that people love to this day. And we'll get to that in a little bit.
Cool.
But let's talk about the next chapter, because this is where I know a little bit less about what you were involved in. So did you go directly from SCT to DrewTech?
I did. So when I left SCT, I took a few months off, and I was trying to decide what do I want to do next. And I had an opportunity to stay in the industry and become an executive for some company. And then I had this DrewTech opportunity, which originally was to help him sell the company. And, I had this decision, like, I could either go all in with Drew, or I could go after some executive job. And, what do I want to do for myself? Like, not just car goals, but financial and career goals. And it's like, I want to be a business owner. I want to have more say in how things are done in the future. And so originally the deal with Mike and I was he wanted me to help him sell his business. And so we went down that path, and I found some buyers, and we got pretty far along. There was an offer on the table and a purchase agreement. And Mike and I sat in a bar one day, like 2 weeks before this deal's going to happen. And, I think we could do better. Like, it's going to take us a while, because I think we want to change like the products but the technology is there. And I think we could do more with this business. And at that time, DrewTech was less than $1 million a year in revenue, and like 4 or 5 people. And I'm like, I think we could just do more.
A lot of people watching this podcast probably don't know what kind of company DrewTech was. Why don't you explain a little bit about what Drew was doing at that time?
Okay, yeah. So at that time, the CAN bus had just come into vehicles. So vehicle data architecture was all serial buses, and then the CAN bus comes around, and all of the car companies had to have new tools to engineer and service cars. And so DrewTech was really at the front line of how do vehicle manufacturers deal with the CAN bus coming into vehicles. At the same time, the EPA was looking at how do we service vehicles outside of the dealership with software updates. And they had this regulation for reprogramming to say everybody anywhere in the world should be able to update software in a car. And if you think about 20 years ago, nobody cared back then, right? You had one ECU, maybe 2 in a car. And so software updates weren't a thing. But they were really forward-looking and saying we need to build a standard and tools that anybody can update factory software in cars. So Drew's very early days were developing the standard for reprogramming with the SAE and with automakers and other suppliers, and then building the first box to do it. Now, when I came into the picture and Drew was thinking about selling his business, he had built this box to do software updates, and he was trying to sell it to car companies. And, selling to a car company is really difficult because it's a very long sales cycle. It's relationship driven. Once you win the business, you're under purchasing scrutiny and long contracts, and it's like feast or famine. And so the first thing I did when I got there is I said, let's sell this tool to the aftermarket. Let's sell it to distributors. Let's find partners, because if we could sell the tool, they need it, right? And they might not need it a lot today in 2006, but they're going to eventually need it everywhere. So let's sell this tool. And so we got a partnership with Snap-on. And now we're selling the tool under the Snap-on name. We got a partnership with all of these different companies who would sell the tool for us, because we didn't have a big sales force yet. We went from 5 people to 10. And we're just getting product out there. And it was all around reprogramming at first. And then something really interesting happened. Around 2010, it was clear to a lot of us in the industry that the OEM diagnostic software was becoming important, and more for repair of cars, but even the tuning guys, like all of a sudden, if your tuner doesn't have access to certain data or a bidirectional control, you have to go get a Tech 2, right? Or Tech 2 Win, or GDS2, or Ford IDS. And so we saw this vision. What if the factory diagnostic tool could work through this JBox, through J2534, instead of having to buy every tool? And I remember the day I was in the parking lot at NADA, and I get this call from this guy, Aaron Lowe. I didn't know him at the time. He's like, "Hey, I'm with AutoCare, and we want to do our right to repair law. What do you think? Somebody told me to call you." And I'm like, "Aaron, you should require OE diagnostics to go through this pass-through device, because then everybody in the aftermarket could have access to OE diagnostics." And so that became a part of right to repair. It covered other things like service information, but it also covered how you could get the factory diagnostic tool through this standard JBox, which Drew made one. There were some other people who made them. So this whole time this is going on, Drew Tech is starting to grow and build more J2534 tools for just different repairers. And then right to repair comes around and makes it law. Basically says every car company has to have this standard solution. And 2014 was when the law, I mean, now we're going back just 10 years, right? So 10 years ago, the law comes around and says, okay, everybody has to have diagnostics. And again, like if you relate it to racing and performance, like I was down this other path, service and diagnostics and collision repair. And it didn't really play into racing and performance yet. I will tie that together kind of at the end of the story. So Drew's like building these boxes. Right to Repair is pushing OEMs to use it. Actually, the car companies benefited significantly because they used to spend a lot of money developing diagnostic tools. Now they could just make software. They didn't have to make the tools because you could use any standard tool. And then car technology changed. I'm sure you dealt with that on the racing side. Gateways came into play. Ethernet was put on ECUs. The CAN technology changed from just regular CAN to flexible data rate CAN. Like all these new protocols and enabling technology for autonomous cars started to come in. Well, we had laid the first course of foundation with standardization, so it just fell into the mold. So now Drew is just building diagnostic tools, and repair shops are starting to flash cars a little more and a little more. Like I remember probably the '05 Mustang was one of the first electrically complicated vehicles, right? Throttle by wire. And then probably around 2010, 2011, 2012, we started to see more ECUs, more stability control. Like just the architecture of cars changed from one ECU to 5 to 60, almost overnight, like heated seats. They had computers in them and stuff. So we're growing, we're building our business. And at the same time, we also had Emotion as a second company, and because I had this passion still for racing and performance, and I thought, let's make digital gauges. That would be fun. And so Drew Tech had engineering resources to do that, but didn't really fit our brand. Or we're like building service tools, so we built this Emotion company to build digital gauges. And the first product, probably not a lot of people remember, it was called Dash DAC. And people didn't even know what it meant. It's like Dash Data Acquisition, DAQ. And it was a touch screen. It ran Linux. It had configurable gauges. You could move the gauges around. You could design your own gauges. And it interfaced with the OBD, but also with like the Phytech system and like all these different Haltech, whoever was out there at the time that had ECU data. So we're doing digital gauges. So like we had these two balancing acts of Drew Tech on one side and then Emotion on the other side doing digital gauges. And then in 2015, something really interesting happened. We were building emissions tools at Drew Tech for California, and we ran into this company, Opus. And Opus was building emissions tools for the state of California, and Drew Tech ended up winning a big contract for the BAR program. And then Opus came around and said, maybe you should join us. And Mike Drew was, the business had really grown at that point. We're probably like 40, 50 people. And Mike is a brilliant engineer, but also an owner of the business, and your risk goes up, your exposure goes up. We had already been sued for patent infringement by a major player, like all these sort of nuclear events that can kill you, like the bigger you get, the more they pop up. So
Yeah.
Mike was kind of like, I think I'm ready to step back from this. And Opus made an offer to bring us in. And what compelled me was the Lothar Geilen, the CEO of Opus. We sat down and he's like, Brian, I want you to grow the business. So what if you had access to funding? Like, what if you could buy companies? Like, I never thought about buying a company at Drew Tech. We just built everything and
Right.
we just innovated. I'm like, we could acquire companies. And so that was the Opus chapter. And
Well, let's back up just a
Yeah,
second
yeah.
because we skipped over a very important thing that's probably going to be in the title of the video because that's probably going to be one of the products that people know your connection with the best, other than SCT, of course,
Yeah.
which is the nGauge.
Yes.
Some people know eMotion made that. Not everybody does. But the nGauge, which is a very, very, very loved device. I mean, I still get, that's been out of business for like 2 or 3 years now.
Yeah.
But I still get messages today. Is there any chance you have an extra nGauge laying around? Because people just love that device so much. That's probably the most success. The other device, was it the Dash Tac or did they
Yeah.
call it something else? That
I think it was called the nDash.
nDash.
That's what they had. Yep.
changed it to, but that's kind of where it went south a little bit because some of the people that were getting that device ran into some issues with the EPA, and we'll leave it at that. But the technology was awesome, and so with the nGauge, building a device like that, is that because of all the OEM type level dealings that you had with Drew Tech and it allows you to do things right? I guess what I'm getting at is, I worked at Diablo Sport and I was involved in when they tried to come out with their newer device. I think it was called an iTunes or something like that before they sold to Holly. And my opinion of that company, and not throwing shade at anybody that worked there, it was like very smart people, but they're like in the dark. Like they didn't know how anything worked and they were just figuring it out. And I'm like, how do we know we're doing this right? Like they're just guessing, as far as bootloaders and how long to wait for a response. And it's a little bit over my pay grade talking about. I was somewhat involved in that. And my impression then was like, this is how it works. Like they don't really just know the right commands to send and all that. So did that give you like an advantage because you guys knew that from a much higher level of, how it worked?
Like even from the SCT days, I've always been excited by technology and innovation. And like, how can you build a product that does something better or has a better user experience? And when eMotion came around, it was originally a digital gauge, right? It was a Linux computer and it had OBD inside of it. And so we had the OBD connection, we're doing digital gauges. And I think, where the direction shifted and probably, led to eMotion no longer offering products is it was such a customizable, flexible platform. Because I like every product, I'm like, let's design something that we can anticipate future opportunity and make this thing configurable and customizable. And so it wasn't just a dash, it was a Linux computer with OBD. So people could write software on that thing that would do things. You could write software on it, and eMotion never made tunes. They were not a tuning company, but their product then was programmable to be able to do things, which unfortunately, there was a lot of good actors in the industry who were using the product as a gauge or sort of any one of the unlimited things you could use a computer for that had an OBD port. But a couple of bad actors got a hold of it and used the product in a way that it wasn't intended to be used. And when you look back and you say, what do you do as a company at the point when you've built this open, flexible thing and it's being used in this way? The only real answer was stop selling it.
Yeah, and that's the unfortunate part about the performance world is there. Now, of course, certain things you can do and be 100% compliant and do it 100% the right way. But a lot of the higher end, real high horsepower stuff that people want to continue to do, even if whether they're being honest or not, saying, I want to make it a track only vehicle, that's not really a path that is available legally right now. And we'll talk about this in a little bit, but the main reason that we started talking recently was because you're running for the board of Sema. Is that right? So maybe you can help us there, or at least, the best way possible. I mean, you can't just make the government change their mind, but there has to be somebody fighting for us in a way that makes sense, right? It's not like we just want everything to go our way, but right now there's no path for a guy that's going to go, I am building 100% race car out of this vehicle.
Yeah.
If it has a VIN, you can't do that legally, right? I mean, I hate to say it, but that's the truth. There's no legal way to make a 2,000 horsepower car.
Yeah, and the path that tuning went down is something that I think we hope to avoid with custom calibration and modification of future vehicles, because the tuning path was in the beginning, nobody really knew, like when the CARB was in the early days with tuners, nobody really knew what was going to happen. CARB's out there saying, we want you to be EO certified. There was some people are saying, oh, that's only in California, you don't have to do that. And I mean, sort of the writing was on the wall, like there's emissions regulations, you have to meet them, right? And the industry ultimately as a whole didn't get there in a productive, smooth way, right? And that led car companies to put in secure gateways and encryption and all sorts of government actions. And, just reflecting on that, and with Sema, why I'm running for the board now is because I see all of this autonomous technology coming. And it's not just racing and performance, it's all vehicle customization. And I really don't want to see us make the same mistake as an industry twice. And instead of like customizing cars and automatic braking systems stop working, because that's what's happening today. 2025, the federal government mandates that all vehicles must have automatic braking. And, it saves lives. So it's a safety feature, and it works, and it was developed for autonomous cars. Now, we don't have autonomous cars yet, right? Because it's hard. It's a lot harder than everybody thought. It's not like autopilot on airplanes that it just goes point to point. Car has to detect things, and we will get there. But in the process now, the government says, hey, we like automatic braking. It saves lives. Most consumers in industry say, yeah, why wouldn't we do that, right? But the technology that is required to stop the car, if you raise or lower it, if you change the tire size, if you paint the car, like all these things now you do, could cause it to malfunction. Now, I just want to relate this back to tuning for a second, because I think it's really relevant for Sema and everybody. Remember what happened when you modified a calibration and it disabled emissions equipment? You were tampering with the vehicle, right? It's a federal law, and you're tampering with it. And that's not sustainable. Whether it's one bad actor or 100, like it's not sustainable. You shouldn't do it. So now we have automatic braking systems, and clearly the industry is going to be modifying these vehicles in ways, if we don't do something, that they'll stop working as designed.
Right.
Tampering. I don't want to go down that path again. I would like to see companies like, industries like Sema and auto care and like all these large industries work with regulators and automakers and say, look, we have to support customization of cars. We have to. It's a lifestyle. It's an industry. The consumer wants that at the end of the day, right? The reason you can get 10 different wheel and tire packages on cars is because people buy them, right? They want them. So how do we get car companies and industry aligned so you can customize cars? And maybe at some point the door gets opened back up for things like calibration and performance racing. It got slammed so hard because all it takes is pointing to one bad actor, or one bad thing that happened, and we just weren't proactive. And so that's why when I look at Sema and what I think I can do, I've had a lot of government interaction with right to repair, and I think right to repair really could become right to repair and customize. And then we can open the door to what is something that we could support as an industry, what is something that doesn't cause emissions problems, doesn't hurt people, benefits the consumer. And that's where I see the future going, especially as vehicle tech just grows and grows and grows. If we don't find a way as an aftermarket to maintain access, we will lose it. And in fact, in Europe, the way you have to log into a vehicle to do just basic data diagnostics, like If you want to diagnose what's wrong with some of these German cars, you have to be a trained technician with credentials and credential into the ECU. And it's only getting more and more like that for cybersecurity and connected vehicles, all these reasons. So we have a very limited amount of time to try to open this door in a way that meets everybody's goals.
Yeah, I definitely agree with the proactive side of things where it was lacking because, I've been doing this late 2003, so a little over 20 years. And for the large part of my career, it just wasn't even considered, honestly. It's been on the radar, but not to the level it's been over the last 3 to 4 or 5 years, where companies are actually getting in trouble. I wasn't educated enough on that because the whole entire industry just kind of ignored it.
I think a lot of industry didn't really know what to do in the very beginning, right? It became more clear as time went on. And I'll credit Sema. They've really done a lot with the emission side of the world. They put together the Sema Garage where they have testing labs and they're encouraging members to become EO certified with their products. And there is no question in my mind, if you make a performance product, you should meet all of the legal and regulatory requirements for that product. They're there for a reason. So Sema is supporting industry to do that because I think Sema looks at this the same way. We want to thrive as an industry, and the only way we're going to do that is to be transparent with each other and with automakers and regulators on what we need and what we're doing, and make sure that we're basically, collaborating instead of what did happen with some players in the tuning industry. And it really gave everybody a black eye that didn't need to happen, right? I mean, those diesel guys were off doing things that just they shouldn't have been doing them at the end of the day.
And I think that's what really brought a lot of attention. Do you think some of the blame of people not paying attention to it as much as they should, being with the EPA and government not being as clear? That's one of the complaints I've heard from multiple people. It's like, well, just tell me in plain words what I can and what I can't do. It took a long time for that conversation to happen when all this was developing over the last few years. And it got to the point where it's like, well, you can't do anything. Technically, if it's got a VIN.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things I've learned interacting with regulators and government is you don't normally get an answer to a question, because then an answer requires lawyers and qualification and study. So there's nobody you can call and be like, hey, are you okay with this? You almost have to understand for yourself what the potential risks are of, okay, it says this and what does that actually mean? You have to translate it. And so industry has started to translate these regulations. And I think hindsight, it's pretty clear. If they say you need to be compliant to federal emission standard, you just have to be compliant to it. They don't want to give you a yes, no, because it's in writing. And kind of relating that to the automatic braking thing, NHTSA has a standard for automatic braking. And at the end of the day, I think the message to industry is that car needs to meet that standard, right?
Well, I guess it's really, you could compare it to other government agencies like the IRS, right? They have a huge stack of rules, but a lot of people are confused by it. It's up to you to figure it out. And if you don't get it right, you're in trouble.
That's a great example. When you send your taxes into the IRS, if you sent them a note and said, are you good with this?
Right.
You will not get an answer,
right.
Except if they're not good with it. And then you'll get an answer in due course, and you may not like that answer. And
it's unfortunate that things can't, I don't want things to be more lax. There needs to be rules, but I guess if there was a way to humanize these government agencies a little bit better, they're supposed to be serving us at the end of the day. So yeah, they can't have every idiot in the world calling them up and asking questions, but there needs to be some recourse for better information sharing, because not only are you dealing with a written word that you have to follow, you have to deal with the person behind that that's interpreting that and what their mindset is compared to yours, right? You could take the same wording and look at it differently. It's it's pretty clear when it comes to the EPA now, where it's pretty much if you touch anything emissions related or defeat any, it's
I think their intent is now very clear, but a lot of laws are intentionally written vague. And I've been a part of the lawmaking process and drafting things, and I've watched drafts that were very clear become very vague, and it's almost purposeful because of the political nature of the world, right?
Right.
Like we don't want to be clear if we don't have to be. And I think as an individual, as a racer or as a business owner, that is where you need your industry networks to serve you. And like I mentioned, Sema, they have been a great resource, and they're growing their capabilities to be able to be a liaison between government and car enthusiasts. Because as a car enthusiast, maybe you can write your senator a letter,
Mm-hmm.
but institutes like Sema and AutoCare and MEMA, they're actually in the meetings with government. They're educating. In fact, Sema has a DC political day coming up, and they're actually in Washington D.C. with members to talk about some of these issues. And you need like the power of banding together,
Mm-hmm.
and sort of some transparency within your network of like, these are the things we're going to band together on, right? Because SEMA does everything from trails that have been made illegal to drive off road to ICE versus EV, mandates and internal combustion and right to modify, and they're like they have a lot of different things going on. And so they need to understand from their membership, like where should their priority be, from a legislative lawmaking side. And I feel like new vehicle technology is, you can't ignore it, right? I
Right.
mean, 2025 and by 2030, we're going to see a fair number of fully autonomous cars on the road.
Mm-hmm.
So let's just put ourselves in that world for a minute and think about like your business, right? So now you have an autonomous Mustang come in the door. Like, what do you need from industry to be able to, and like, what do you want to do with that car? You think he's going to want to have higher performance? Do you think he's like, what are the things that you need to do, and how do we support that? And
Yeah. The cynical me makes me think that that's just not going to happen. At that point, performance is over. And if you want performance, buy a 2023 and earlier Mustang or F-150 or whatever. But I hope that's not the case.
I think we've been saying that for the last 20 years. Like,
True.
as every new tech comes out, I remember like ECUs get encrypted and things. It's like, well, nobody will buy those cars anymore, and nobody will modify them. And the consumers still desire that,
Yeah.
right? Unless something changes in a couple generations, and no longer do people desire to have big wheels and tires and customized cars and to go fast. I mean, Tesla was interesting because it's EV, right? But it's also a performance car.
Mm-hmm.
So they're pulling in people who used to buy Porsches and like sort of other cars because it's performance. And I think like we have to find our way through this, but it's scarier to me than it's ever been if we don't do something.
Yeah. And, maybe as I get older, maybe like the harder stuff seems less, the hard path. I'm like, whatever. But the people are what drive the market, not me. And a good example of that is, the Bronco
Yeah.
is an encrypted computer, and people have been working for a long time trying to figure out how to tune that. And now people are putting different PCMs in it and doing, and I have a good relationship with Eric at HP Tuners, and he hit me up because I have a Bronco Raptor, and he's like, "Oh, dude, we got this," and I'm like, I'm not doing all that. Like, it's a Bronco Raptor. Like, I don't need another 100 horsepower. But people are calling here. Other companies like Livernois and a bunch of other companies are doing it. And I'm like, man, I can't believe all these people spending that kind of money to just tune a Raptor, a Bronco Raptor even.
Yeah.
But it's happening. So you're right. It's regardless of the difficulties involved, there's gonna now. I do think it shrinks the market quite a bit. Because for every guy that before, if you could just flash a Bronco, you're gonna get maybe 5 to 10% that are gonna spend an extra. I don't know how much it is. I haven't done one yet, but you're probably adding another $1,000+ by the time you get a PCM and do all the programming and all that kind of stuff. But there's people that are gonna want to do it. It would be much nicer if there was a more direct path around that. I want to talk to you some more about PCM encryption and all that and what you might know about it. But we did skip over Opus, and that interests me quite a bit because I know zero about that other than we're friends on Facebook and you post stuff about it, and I see little blurbs about it, and I'm like, wow, what the hell is this stuff? Like remote diagnostics, and there's a person on the other side helping you. So why don't you tell me a little bit like what Opus does? I'm sure they do a lot of things, but
Yeah, so going back to 2015, Drew Tech gets acquired by Opus, and Mike Drew retires, and I stay on, and then I get the title president of Opus IVS. And at the time, it was Drew Tech, but we're like IVS, Intelligent Vehicle Support. That was the vision. So how can we help repairers deal with complicated vehicles? And Drew had, I don't want to say they had solved the problem of access to diagnostics, but that was their mission, is access to OE diagnostics. And what we saw is a lot of people couldn't use it because it's hard to use. And you're brand specific. So you're like a GM MasterTech and a Mercedes rolls in, and so your shop can't do that. But now families are blending cars together. Remember when it was like a Ford family or a GM family?
yeah,
Like that's rarely the case anymore. Now there's a Tesla, there's a Volvo, and there's a Ford in the garage, or there's a Toyota, and there's a Honda, and there's a Nissan in the garage. So the requirement for repair shops is all brands. So we see complex vehicle technology in all brands, and thought Opus can solve this problem. What we're going to do is we're going to build a platform for diagnostics. It's going to be a Windows-based thing. It's going to run all this different software. We're going to make our own diagnostic software, and we're going to run OE software. So all this different software is going to run on this platform. And to make our own software, Drew Tech didn't have any software. This is where the Opus capital came in hand. So we acquired Autologic. They were a European diagnostic company. And that was my first acquisition. I'm now leading this Opus IVS, and we bought this European-based business, 100 employees in Europe, and European diagnostic tools and European techs. And the first thought was, all right, we're going to turn them into all brands. Like this is going to be easy, right? Everything sounds easy at first. So we acquired them, and then we realized that it's a lot of work to build all brands of support. So then we acquired another company called Auto Ingenuity, which made American diagnostic software. And then we acquired a company called Farsight, which was all remote services. And then we acquired a company called BlueLink, which was remote diagnostic technology. And you bundle all this together. And what we ended up with is this platform our customers use. And whenever they have a problem, they reach out to us through the platform. And we have 150 techs now in our call centers. We have every brand of tech. We have people who work on Rivians, Teslas, you name it. So they reach out to us when that car rolls in that they're just not ready to do, but it's in their shop. And then our tech gets on the line. He connects to the tool remotely. He even uses OE software or reprograms it, and we help them fix the car. So that's our business model today. And we're even using AI now. It's like, how can we make the process more streamlined for that? But we just want to help people fix cars. And so that's what Opus grew up to. And, now we're like 400 people.
Yeah, we're not 400 people, but that's a good parallel with tuning, really, right? We're remote tuning vehicles where they don't have a local person that could do it properly.
Yeah.
So we're doing not as advanced like custom software and all that. It's a little simpler, email and all that. But for the most part, it's the diagnostic repair version of what we do with remote tuning, but just at a much higher level because there's way more repair and diagnostic work needed than performance work.
I imagine every car you touch is different.
Yeah, the issue with remote tuning, it depends on who you're talking about. Talking about us, where we do a fairly large volume of remote tuning, some people think that that's a negative because we're big. It's like, no, that's a positive because there's a chance we touched a car very similar to yours before. And the advantage there is we can usually identify an issue, right? This tune should be good. You have positive 50 fuel trims at idle.
Yep.
You have something wrong. You didn't do something right, and we can speak on that with authority. Whereas there's other times where I've tuned a vehicle and it's kind of like a one-off deal. And I'm like, where's the fuel error coming from? Is it, a leak? Is there a fuel injector? I have the wrong fuel injectors, or fuel pressure's wrong, or there's a million reasons it could be wrong. So that's the big challenge. Like you're working in what I would call a standard world, right? Like because there's pinpoint tests, there's exact ways things should work. You should get an exact response from a module that you're talking to, and if you don't, that module might be messed up. Whereas we're more like, you know,
Yeah, we have service procedures,
yeah,
and we follow what the OEM writes in their service manuals for a diagnostic procedure. And at the end of the day, that's what technicians are trained to do. Is now certainly like being on the phone, and you point out like in the remote tuning world, like you hear the same problem a couple times, and the remote experts, it's the same thing. Like these guys, they're on 5, 10, 15, 20-minute calls, so they're on maybe 30 or 40 of them a day, and they're all in the same brand.
yeah.
And so like in a course of a week, you might run into the same problem 3 or 4 times. But at the end of the day, we can always default back to, we're going to look at the factory service information, and this is going to prescribe a set of diagnostic steps or calibration steps for this vehicle. And so it's a very manageable situation at scale. And that's how Opus is scaled, because we basically build a formula of qualified technician, access to OE diagnostics remotely, training. We train everybody like OE service procedures.
Yeah. I find that whole deal super interesting. So the techs that are doing this, are they former like normal repair techs that this is like a way for them to get out of the garage kind of thing? Or
There's a lot of that. A lot of our techs come from car dealerships where they've been there 10, 15 years. And, working on cars is hard, right? I mean, like I don't have a career where I work on cars, but I still love to wrench on cars. And, my hands are still cut up from the last job. And every time I do it, I'm like, man, this is like, I'm sore. I've got fluid on my face. It's like the whole thing, right? And so if you've done that every day for your entire career and you're not ready to retire, but you have all this knowledge built up, that's your intellectual property and your skill as a technician. Now you can come into an office environment and you can actually use your experience in a way that is not so physically straining on your body anymore.
would you say like the majority of your business is like body shops versus repair shops, or is it kind of evenly spread? It seems like the body shop thing there, when I thought about it, there'd be a huge opportunity there because shops might have somebody who's good at diag, but a body shop definitely doesn't usually.
We've grown a lot in the last 5 years in the collision space. And so Opus has major customers like Gerber and Crash Champions and Classic Collision. They all use our tools, and so do thousands of other collision shops. But we're kind of equally broken down into 3 segments. We have collision repair, we have professional diagnostics, which is just repair shops, and then we have specialty like reprogramming and transmission installation. Because you install a GM transmission, you have to flash the computer to install it. So even transmission repairers, that they probably looked at the world 5 years ago and said, I can't flash that thing, so we'll just do, we'll do the 4-speed transmission. But now everything's flashable, so they've come along. And so those are our 3 segments, and they're almost equally divided. Now, collision is definitely growing, because there's just brand new cars get crashed.
Yeah. So what's the general business model? Is that like a yearly subscription that a shop does, or like how do they pay for that?
In our 3 different segments, there are 3 different business models. In collision, in some ways, the paying piece it's completely different than mechanical repair. So like you run a repair garage or a performance shop, you got to call the owner, right? I want to sell you this part, or you need this part, or your car broke. And so you're dealing with the owner. Every single transaction is a different owner, right? A different set of criteria on how they're going to decide, can they pay for it? In collision, you're dealing with insurance companies. So in some ways it scales better because you start to understand what insurance companies will and won't pay for, and how they'll work. And in other ways it scales worse because you still have to fix the car, and the insurance company may not understand, because every industry has some bad players. So even in collision, some people bill for things they don't do, or they charge for things they don't do. It's not widespread. I think the collision industry as a whole is very well managed, but some insurance companies will deny things that are completely legitimate repairs because they just don't know. Like they don't have the information to know like this was actually needed to be done versus not. So that's how collision deals with it. So everything we do in collision is transactional.
Okay.
Because it goes to the insurance company. And then everything we do in mechanical is either subscription based for like a tool or a software updates or a live expert service, or it's transactional for like a flash programming. Because like all the car companies now are moving their OE software to pay per use.
Oh, okay.
You remember like you'd get a subscription to Tech 2.
Yeah.
It was like a couple $1,000s a year. Now every GM vehicle you have to pay a certain amount of money to reprogram it. And we're starting to see diagnostic fees. Like you want to access that car for diagnostics, you're going to pay a fee.
Gotcha. So like the reason I ask and I'm so curious about it is, we have a Ford IDS here, but I wouldn't say that's common in the performance world, especially if they're not Ford specific. A Ford specific guy might have an IDS, but chances are they don't. And as things progress, it becomes more and more important. Like constantly we're having to tell remote customers, man, like a good example would be a computer's locked from another tuner. Sometimes we can get around that and get a new tune on it, but sometimes it's like the easiest way to handle this is just put the car back 100% to stock with IDS. Oh, I don't have that. Okay, well, you need, and then they try to deal with a Ford dealer, and most Ford dealers are pretty good about it. You explain what you need done, they'll do it. But a lot of them are like, no, I'm not doing that. I don't know what you're talking about or whatever. And it's important. Even you put a new transmission in, and you got to program the solenoid strategy into the computer. But the problem is things still kind of work if you don't do that. So then people just skip it. And then it's like all messed up, and it's like, or you've got, there's so many ways you can mess up. We just had a old Bronco. Well, it wasn't like an actual old one, but you buy the old body and build it. Mm-hmm. And it was a Coyote 10 speed, blah, 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 nice, blah, blah. And like, you put it in drive and it would take like 3 seconds and then, but bam, and we started like looking into it and I'm like, okay, well, where'd you get the trans from? This is 4-wheel drive. Oh, that's out of F-150. Well, what year F-150? Okay, where's the engine? What's the PCM? And it wound up being that it was tuned off the wrong year strategy in the PCM. And once we fixed that, because all the stuff for the solenoids were different. Yeah. Beyond just programming the strategy, just the calibration stuff was completely different. But the problem is like this guy built a Bronco in his garage and it was beautiful. And he thought he did everything as right as he could. Yeah. And he couldn't even drive it. So it just or even like good examples, we've been helping Whipple dyno a lot of these 24 Mustangs, which are completely locked out. Mm-hmm. I mean, they're such a pain in the butt. I don't know that the automatics do it, but the stick cars, you have 2 dyno pulls. And
that's it. Yep.
And then you get a wrench light, and it's something with the speed sensor. And guess what? HB tuners, SCT, even Whipple's own tool can't fix it. I have to either. Before I knew the IDS could fix it.
It's IDS. So Ford has IDS, FJDS, and FDRS. They're all like sort of the factory service things. And no, you're right on. This is a growing problem for anyone in repair or performance, that if you don't have access to that dealer diagnostic system, you're going to have to get in and out of modes on the vehicle where, maybe it's like one example is you have to reprogram the ECU. And I think that one's growing, but it's also like kind of a corner case because a lot of tuner guys sort of solve that problem. But like, okay, I've got to reprogram the car. So you can use, if it's Ford, like FJDS is available on their website to download. I think it's like $50 for 3 days. Mm-hmm. And then you can use a J2534 device and you can just reprogram it. But you can also do diagnostic functions and like these ADAS calibrations, like just like changing your windshield, or if your car's out of alignment, you have to recalibrate the vehicle for all these circumstances. So it's going to start to happen soon where you're not just going to get calls for, I need to reprogram the ECU back to stock, but I need to run a service function to get that vehicle back into a state where it will drive again. And whether it's calibration or just a coding event. And the dealer tools now, because of right to repair, like you have access to all of that. And the right to repair is always under fire and there's always challenges for the future. But, that's another fight. But you have access to those tools, but a lot of people don't know that, right?
Right. Yeah, and I think that's the place in the performance world that is super bad is diag work, right? Just throwing parts at cars. And, I don't have as much education on like pinpoint tests and all. Like a good example, we had a car come down from Georgia, new motor. It had a bunch of cam codes. So I told the guy, I said, it was a shop that brought it down, not the customer. And I was like, man, something's messed up. And it was a 2011 on top of it, right? Mm-hmm. So now you got a car that's decently old. The engine's been out. It's got cam codes. My mind went to harness. Harness is messed up. Yeah. But he left the car, and then my head tech, Adam, who has a long history at Ford and knows the right way to diagnose things. He came to me yesterday, and he's like, "Oh, I'm finally ready to mess with that car. What's it doing?" And I was like, "Oh, it's throwing all these cam codes. I think it's probably like a wire or this and that." Yep. 20 minutes later, came back. It's fixed. I was like, "How'd you find it that fast?" He's like, "I just followed the pinpoint test, and they basically had the intake and exhaust cam sensors swapped, and they're different style sensors. One's a VR, one's a Hall effect. I don't know why. So one's like a 3-wire, one's a 2-wire. And when they went to go put the motor in, they just put whatever plug fit whatever sensor, but the sensor was in the wrong spot.
Yeah.
I'm like, most of the shops, that would have been like months of figuring that out because they don't know how to do a pinpoint test. They wouldn't have caught that. And like, I'm just pointing that out because, and it's not because of me, it's because of my employees that are so good at it. It's like, man, if that was like 10, 20 years ago, we would have been like, I don't know what's wrong. We put a new engine harness on it. We changed, we would put the same damn sensor back in the same hole because we would have taken one out and been like, oh, this one goes here. Not that, oh, that's the wrong sensor, So, and that's a 2011 car, so as things get newer and newer and newer, it gets so incredibly complicated that I don't know that the economics would be there for a service like what you have, but the need for it is there. Most shops, performance-wise, are not necessarily run properly as a business. So, the budget might not be there for a service like that, but the use, that would be transformative to the performance industry because so many people are just part after part after part. So I have a huge amount of respect for doing things the right way because I kind of was brought up not necessarily doing it the right
shop. Yeah. Like, I see a lot of things going on there, and it's incredible, like the work that's going in and the capability. And, it's definitely, whether you're repairing cars or modifying cars, there is really skilled talent. And then there's people in the industry who won't last very long, who are throwing parts at things and, just not really figuring out what's wrong with that vehicle. And, your problem is, it's getting bigger, right? Like the complexity of the vehicles is getting bigger. There's just more barriers to enter. It's harder to find good technicians, right? That's another industry problem we have is we're not getting enough technicians coming into the industry. We're sort of aging out in terms of our skilled, qualified technician base, and we're going to need more technicians.
Yeah, and that's one problem we're currently facing. We're shorthanded right now. But I've asked myself multiple times, like, how do I find the right guy? Because it's a very unique type of situation. And we're in a different position than a lot of performance shops because we do have the large business with remote tuning and parts online. Our revenue is good enough that I can offer very good health insurance and things like that, which almost no performance shops offer that. And I actually added health insurance here because of the guy I just told you about, because he's coming out of Ford. And he's like, man, I'd love to do it, but what about insurance? I go, if you take the job, I'll have insurance in 6 months. And that's really because it came up to that point. I'm like, man, I don't know if we can afford it right now, but I told Adam we were doing it, so we're going to do it. And we did it. And it's been great, and I love taking care of my employees. But that's, just because you want to doesn't mean you can. Like most shops are not economically in the right position to be able to do that. So I don't know, maybe we need some more performance business coaching or something. I'm not necessarily the guy to do it, but
young people are definitely value things differently. Like the next generations look at work-life balance, they look at benefits, they look at time off much differently than like I think you and I are cut from a mold where it's like,
Yeah.
it's time to go to bed. I guess it's time to get off work. You just go, go, go.
Yeah. Or you're pretty much, we're not considering what you had just mentioned. And we're just considering like, that's what I want to do. And if I have to do it without health insurance and I have to do it like the harder way, I'm going to do it because that's what I want to do. And it'll work out in the end. And those types of mentalities usually do work out in the end because they're goal driven, right? Like, this is what I want to do in my life. I'll figure out how to make that work. Whereas, well, yeah, that sounds great. And the salary's pretty good, but there's a list of things that make it not sound as attractive. And it's like, the world's not going to be perfect. I see all these videos people share, people complaining that have degrees and like, the only job I can find is McDonald's. Well, go work at McDonald's until you can find the job that your degree's for. If that's what you need to survive, do it. Right?
Yeah. Oh, I totally support like just get somewhere, get going. Like,
yeah.
And sometimes the right path takes years to find.
Yeah.
But you gotta be ready for it. You gotta be open to it, and you can't wait. Like life goes on in the meantime.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And sometimes you might fail the first time. Modular Depot was a big shop. We had a huge facility, and from people on the outside looking in, they were like, "Man, that is so badass." And it's like, not really. I wasn't making any money. I closed down my business to go work for Diablo Sport. And then, when this Palm Beach Dyno was born, I initially didn't want to get into the mechanical side of things because it's the most challenging part, right? If I'm tuning, I'm in control 100%. The minute I have employees and techs and all that, and you got to stand behind work. But I did it, and I'm super happy I did because this time around, it's awesome. We're having a blast. There's nothing more rewarding than building the entire car, right? You could tune a car, but if you didn't build it, it's like not as cool. But now all of a sudden it's like, this guy just brought us a bone stock F-150 and now it makes 1,000 horsepower. He's super happy. It's great. So, you always have to push through the failures. If you love something, you have to continue to try it. I mean, I guess at some point, if you're not very good, you got to realize that. But most people are capable enough with enough effort to get to their goals, and they just count themselves out before they get there. One thing I wanted to bring up before I forget, because you brought it up, is you said you guys started using AI.
Yeah.
And that's obviously a hot topic. And I am personally interested in that because I have 20 years of documents and PDFs and my customer ticket system and all that stuff. And I've dug into it a little bit to try and build my own trained model off of my own data to where we can offer maybe a chat bot to where people, even my own, even for myself, because there's lots of times where somebody will get a code and I'm like, oh my God, I solved this like 3 years ago, but who was it? What was and maybe I should have documented it better there, but it's somewhere in my hard drive or in my ticket system or whatever that possibly I could just go in there and say, have we ever run into this code? And it tells me, and it's just like huge, and I'm going to get there. I just haven't had the time to do it. And I like to do everything myself. Maybe I should get somebody to help me with it, but
I probably use AI almost every single day for something. And like the language models are very useful for things that maybe people don't consider. Like I'm going to put out a press release. I'm going to make a flyer. I'm going to send email communications to a bunch of customers. You can let AI you type the message, you run it through AI, and it can make it simpler to understand, cleaner, more consolidated. It's like a spell checker on steroids, basically. But in the automotive space, we've been experimenting with AI for sending it diagnostic data and letting it decipher probability, possibility, because every phone call that Opus gets, we record. And our phone system can flatten them all to text files. So we have hundreds of thousands of text files of professional technician to professional technician paired to diagnostic data results. And so some of the products that we're working on really center around you have a question or a problem, and we have our live experts ready to go. But there's only so many of those in the universe, right? So why don't we first let you interact with AI with your trouble codes, and we're going to give you some statistical information like these are the probable causes of this, and then maybe you can chat with it and say I tried that or I tried this, and then like when you reach a point with AI where you're like, okay, it's not in the database, AI is not helping me. Let's put the professional tech on. It goes faster. The repair is faster because AI is like instant. It's like, it just responds right away. But the guy was in Menards the other day. I needed a car battery for one of my projects, and they didn't have the one in stock that I need. And I'm looking at all these other ones. I'm like, shoot, I didn't measure the battery. I just came to the store. So I just jump into AI, and I'm like, I had a Group 65 battery on this car. Can you recommend other ones that are close to the same size, same amperage, and same polarity? And it just gave me a list, like from top to bottom priority. Now, I could have done that on Google in like 25 minutes, but I'm in the aisle of the store, and it just tells me. And I go look at the next group, and I take it home, and it's like it fits the same size. So every little thing like that with AI, it's just, and a lot of technicians fix cars on Google search. And it requires you to read, open threads. You end up on enthusiast boards. Like a lot of repair comes from enthusiast boards where it's like the modular depot days where people are talking about problems. And so you got to read all of that, and you got to read maybe 3 pages of 5 threads to draw your conclusion of what was the common elements of those, where AI has already read all of that. And so it's just going to jump you to the top of the summary. Like if you were to Google on the very top, sometimes it's like, this is what it means. That's what AI is doing right now. And that's the easy stuff. We've asked it to read wiring diagrams and like send it an image and ask it what it is. And like, it was close. Yeah. It's like, this is a 2008 Ford Taurus, and it was an Escape. It was like, there was no Ford word on that diagram. So it's getting close, and eventually you might be able to feed it, documents, repair documents as images, and let it read them and help you out. So there's unlimited possibilities. It's early. Like, let's not overpromise what it could do for us today, but certainly it has a future.
Yeah, and the way I look at it is it's almost like I would think of it as like supercharged memory, right? Like I have 20 years of experience, all this stuff that I've forgotten, but a lot of it is in, it's in text and emails and all that stuff. And I'm like, if AI can harness that, I basically can instantly remember anything I've done if it's fed the right information. And I'm just talking on a personal level, not like general knowledge, but just even my own personal knowledge. Train it on all that stuff. And then you train it on all your photographs from the last 20 or 30 years. And you're like, hey, when did I go here? And boom, it knows because it found the right photograph or whatever. And I think people don't really understand that. And you mentioned Google. I don't know if you've turned it on or not, but it has the summarized AI at the top now. And it's not the best yet, but it's way better than reading through everything. It usually gets you close and at least gets you down the right path. And everything I'm doing now, it's like I just went on Facebook. I don't know if you noticed on the phone, if you go to the search, it's no longer search. It's AI, which I don't like too much because and it's new, so they're trying to figure it out, but it's like giving me things I don't want. I just want to search for that name, show me that page, but then it's giving me all these weird results. That's just fine tuning from here. So I think people don't realize how much their life's going to change over the next you say 5 to 10 years, but to me, it's accelerating at a pace that's kind of crazy.
Like generative image and like you can generate an image of like a Palm Beach dyno in the desert, with a Mustang with flames on it, and it just makes it, right? And
I use AI constantly. I use it. It's built into Photoshop now.
Yeah, I've used it in Photoshop where you can be like, get rid of this, and it gives you 3 shots at it, and it's like,
well, like a good example, we do a lot of media on the cars we build, like that red car that they were washing when we came inside. After this, I'm going to go take some photographs of it. I used to spend a lot of time trying to find the exact perfect background. Now, and I would be like, oh, I would do this, but there's a fire hydrant there. Or that's kind of easy to take out without AI. But, other times there's been like a bunch of crap or like a semi in the way or whatever. And it's just like, who cares? Go in, circle it, boom, it's gone, Or like you said, press releases. Not every single one of them, but most of my not personal, but Facebook posts for the business or press releases or almost anything that I have to write, I use AI to write. Because the way I would do it before was I would write out bullet points and then I would be like, well, how does this need to be organized and how is the best way to make people understand it? And then I would write it and send it to my wife, who is super crazy grammar and spelling and like really bad. And I would send it to her and she would make a million revisions and back and forth. And now I just go to Chat GPT or I've tried the Twitter X1 Grok and there's a bunch of them. Go in, just, hey, I own Palm Beach Dyno and we're going to release this new product and here's all the benefits, and just talk to it like I would be telling you about it. And it blows my mind most of the time. A lot of the times it's a little overly descriptive or you could tell it was written by AI, but then you could take that and just make a couple little tweaks to it to make it more human. And I'm like, and I'll send it to my wife and she's like, that's perfect. Did you use AI? And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, there's certain like Chat GPT-isms where like it always starts with this like lead in and it's like, oh, somebody will send me an email. I'm like, oh, I know that came from Chat GPT. And, but like relating AI back to service for a second, like walk down a road with me. Like, okay, so generative text and like we're giving descriptions and we have some generative imagery, right? And now generative video is the next chapter that is developing, and I haven't seen really good generative video yet, but it's in process to say, could we make a video on how to replace a part? And that will come. Like in the next 5 years, like I'll say, make me a video on how to replace this alternator on a 2015 Ford Mustang, and it will generate a video. And then let's pair that with some other, because I love to pair technology together. It's like take these two things and put them together. And have you seen the Apple Vision Pro yet?
Yeah.
Okay, so we got one. It's incredible. Like I still haven't quite figured out how to use the keyboard with my eyeballs, but you look at a letter and it highlights it and then you click to type. But so now we have a video screen on us, and maybe we have it in the garage, and at some point maybe it can correct your vision and do all these other things. But so now we're going to generate a video and we're going to put it on the Vision Pro. Say, make me a video on how to replace this part and show me the wiring diagrams. And then you can move them around. Well, you can zoom in on them like, okay, let me stop right there. And like we've probably all done this with our laptop where we've got a YouTube video and they're stepping through something. So you would like maybe pause a YouTube video and you got dirty hands and then you go change the part and you go to the next step. Well, with like VR and AR and then augmented video, like there's a whole new segment that could develop. It could develop for performance racing too.
So I wanted to get back to the newer vehicle stuff because you probably have a bit more insight into that than most people that I speak to, as far as encryption and the gateways and the locking down of computers. And I get questioned on that all the time. Obviously, Ford was the last of the, between GM, Dodge, and Ford, was really the last to start locking stuff down. And I don't know if that's by design, if they were trying to resist it as long as they could. And people ask me, like, why do they do it? And a lot of people take the more obvious view of it as like, they don't want you to modify the vehicle. And that's part of it. But how much of that plays into over-the-air updates and those reasons, So what's your opinion on that?
I think it was 2016. Pretty famous news case where a guy named Charlie ran a Jeep off the road through the telematics system, exposed a bug in the infotainment system, gained access to the vehicle's CAN bus remotely, and then once you're on the CAN bus, disabling a vehicle could be as simple as sending the ECU too many commands, and then it just shuts down, locks up, or you get into more sophisticated breaking in. But in any case, Charlie and his partner broke into a production vehicle over the air, and they caused it to drive differently. And that moment changed. When that Jeep incident occurred, everybody at the car companies realized, oh, we better secure our systems because we're putting them on the internet with telematics. Telematics is essentially a wired internet wireless connection to the car and the vehicle bus. So Fiat Chrysler in 2018 was the first to launch a secure gateway. And early ones were quite simple, where there was a box, at the OBD plug, and you had to authenticate through it. And some scan tool companies were making like radio connectors, and you could get in over the radio. But that was a first attempt. And then as time has gone on, other automakers have followed them, and now the CAN communications that's happening behind the gateway is now becoming encrypted. So not just like ECU unlocks, but actual messaging between two modules it's all getting encrypted. I mean that, and there's security tokens and credentialing, and all sorts of sophisticated IT architecture going into place. Every car company will eventually have a secure gateway, and a part of right to repair in 2020 in Massachusetts was to say, if the car has a secure gateway, we want the aftermarket to have standardized access to that car, so we're not locked out. Because some of the German automakers have come up with requirements like, if you want to go into our secure gateway, you need to prove you're a technician and you need to be trained. So that would mean if you have this German car show up and you want to authenticate into the car just to do basic things, not even like ECU rewrites, you have to go get training, prove that you're qualified to work on that car. And that goes against everything right to repair is all about. Because right to repair was really like, you own the car, it's yours, right? Anybody that you, the owner, wants to work on the car should be able to do that for you. So these gateways, and late last year, the European Court of Justice made them illegal. And so now Europe is kind of scrambling around with, okay, now that it's illegal, how are we going to get around this? And how are we going to continue with these secure gateways? And then like the diagnostic systems inside of ECUs are also changing to a technology called SOVD, which is a secure onboard vehicle diagnostics. So the tech is changing. And like on one side, right to repair and Sema and AutoCare, and these guys are fighting for access. And on the others, the OEMs are thinking about Charlie. And these vehicles, being disabled or driving off the road. And there's probably also some OEM personal profitable reasons why they want to lock the vehicles down. I mean, we've seen the parts industry dramatically change in the last 5 years. You can't use used parts anymore, and the reason is because it's the theft related. That's the official reason. Like if they steal our car and they sell the mirrors, that's bad. So we're going to make the mirrors not reusable, that kind of thing, right? I guess that's one way to solve a problem. Maybe not the greenest way or the best for people who install parts or even consumers who don't want to put all brand new parts on every car. But all these sort of lockdowns are happening, and the tuning world is sort of getting a side effect of that, because as the lockdowns are happening, I used to just go in and open an ECU and rewrite it. Like Jerry once said, like I could put an Excel file in the ECU if I wanted, it wouldn't do anything. The ability to get, like, let's call that like level 5, it's like level 4 is sending a command, level 3 is reading live data, level 2 is clearing codes, and level 1 is checking codes. They're locking down level 1. So like you want to get to level 5 and level 1 is getting locked down. So that architecture is definitely on the rise, and something that we should all support right to repair, having the sentence in there saying, hey, if there's a secure vehicle gateway, the owner needs to be able to have access to it and provide access to anyone they want. So somebody gets to decide besides a car maker who has access to that car.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people haven't absorbed how big of a deal this is. The first, 23 EcoBoost, most of I think the Broncos, but those are important. But when the 24 Mustang was untunable, now everybody's, let's back up. 21 F-150 was that way. And I don't know the details. I don't know if you know anything about it, but that had encryption, but I guess they accidentally left access to you could turn off the check, I guess.
That's pretty much how, security breaches happen, is like somebody builds a great firewall and then there's like a accidental consequence of sending the wrong message, which causes you to get around it. And I remember when I was in the tuning world, which has been a long time, there was RSA encryption. And I remember one ECU, we could send the file up to the ECU, and at the end of it receiving the file, it would check the encryption, and then it would give the error. And all we had to do is cancel the reprogramming right before that check occurred and the file went in. So that's the sort of fun that it was to like hack and, and get through firewalls. But that world is increasingly getting more sophisticated, and it's almost like bank security now. And there's more people looking at it and testing it, and relating back to the over-the-air cars. They're not really doing it to stop tuners. I don't think they are. That's
Right.
Brian's opinion. I think they're doing it to protect the vehicle owner from having a malicious attack through over the air. But in doing all of that, it so happens that those ECUs get locked down, and then you can't go and do your tuning.
Yeah, because the argument is a lot of the times when I tell people, look, man, I don't know if we're ever going to tune that computer. Maybe there'll be a different computer we can put in there that we can tune. Like, oh, yeah, but that's what they said about the 21 F-150. I go, but you have to understand, they didn't break any encryption. They got around the encryption. But the problem is every time you find a way around something, they close that door, right? So that works 21 to 23, but that does not work on 24 Mustang, 24 F-150, or pretty much anything new at this point. And they're like, they'll get it. I go, based on what? There has to be a back door that's either left on purpose, which is doubtful, or by mistake. I believe the 21 F-150 was like a test mode. You turn the test mode switch on, and then it ignores the encryption or whatever. I don't know exactly. Something like that. And I go, so it's not like some genius like reverse engineered on how to break RSA encryption. Somebody got lucky.
It was like an accident.
Yeah, got lucky, found the switch, and I don't care if they're lucky or smart, they got it done. But unless there is that same type of vulnerability, may never happen, So people don't really understand how bad it is, and I don't have answers for anybody. And obviously it directly affects my business. I tell people all the time, I go, I'm almost 50. There's enough Mustangs and F-150s out there that I can already tune. I'll be fine. Like I'll be doing, I still do 03 Cobras, right? So of course there's always going to be something for me to tune, but the whole entire performance market, I think, has taken a hit already for 24 Mustang. Like, I had a conversation with a friend of mine. He's in the suspension. He has a suspension company. And, when it first started happening, I was like, dude, you don't understand the economic impact here. And he's like, oh, well, this and that. And, Whipple has a deal, so everybody will buy Whipples. I go, I don't think so. And then what about Vortec, ProCharger, Magnuson? Some of them have OEM relationships. They might be able to get something, but not a ProCharger, right? Maybe Magnuson. I don't think so. Roush probably has their deal with Ford, and they can do what Whipple does. But for the most part, there's no way it's not going to shrink the market. It has to shrink the market. I go, we're a year into 24 Mustang. How much revenue have I lost off of that? I probably have lost $200,000 to $300,000 in 1 year because I'm not tuning any 24s. I'm not selling any 24 Pro Chargers, cold air kits, anything that requires the tune. Well, I guess you could do a cold air kit because those are not actually, they have mass air meters, but I don't think they function like a mass air. It's like more of a check. They have a map sensor and that. Okay, yeah. So I think you could put a cold air on it. But for the most part, most of the things you would do that would need a tune, none of those parts are being sold. ProCharger has had a kit that looks awesome, dual throttle body, carbon fiber pipes. What are you going to do with it? And I don't know that there's a solution to it. So, hopefully there's something that could be done about it. I mean, not based on any real knowledge. Do you see any path forward where that could continue? I mean, that's my fear. It sounds like kind of like doomsday a little bit.
It's a long path that we have to go down to get the access back, right? Because the access is being shut down to all of this ability to customize, whether it's tuning or sort of all of these different areas, even wheels and tires. The ability to change tire revs per mile and factory service tools has been going away. And there's sort of no easy answer. I think the real answer is that we need to get access to customized cars. And sure, calibrations needs to be a part of that to the extent that it can be done, in a way that is, preventing the bad actors, right? And keeping the owners safe. But it feels like that's a path worth traveling down, because the alternative is exactly like you said, where you just have to find whatever back doors are left and go through them. And it just feels like there's not, like when I was in that space 20 years ago, the front doors were open
Right.
everywhere, right?
Right.
And now, like I know from friends and talking, like there's not a lot of back doors left, and it seems like they're just closing them one after another. So rather than just sort of let the inevitable happen, where you get maybe one or two OEM partners and what we call like dealer packages of equipment, like how do we get the industry associations? How do we get the voice heard? So we're keeping that door open and maybe getting some front doors open again, because customers, they want this, right? People want to buy cars and have choice and customization. They still want performance cars, and I think the whole world has agreed and understood they need to be emissions compliant and clean, and nobody's really arguing that, right? I mean, that's what needs to happen, but there's demand for that. Until consumer demand dries up and people don't want to modify cars anymore, which I don't see happening, we just have to solve that problem. And I think it's like in Ford's best interests, or GM's, or anybody else, to support that commercially, because I mean, like you've seen it, right? I mean, if the performance parts start to dry up for a performance car, like what would be a Mustang be in 20 years if you couldn't customize it? It would be just like every other car.
Yeah.
And then why would you spend Mustang money? And like Mustang may not be the most luxurious, comfortable car to drive, right? It's a performance car. It's like that's what you have it for. What if it can't do that anymore? Is it still going to be around?
Yeah. But I think one of the most realistic paths forward is, and it's not going to be like it is today, right? Because let's say we tune a twin turbo kit on an 18 to 23 Mustang GT. Well, everybody's running different boost and different fuel injectors, different fuel, and their fuel system's configured one way versus another way. And it's like everyone's a little different. Not exactly. I mean, we do so many that they're not all different, but there's so many different combinations. I think the only path forward that I can see is getting more homogenized combos where it's just like A, B, or C, right? And then better access to, like, for instance, Whipple has a relationship with Ford, who has Whipple has a relationship with, I believe he's a former engineer at Ford Racing, and all that, that has all the proper certifications to be able to use the Ford server to sign the file, whatever.
Yep.
I don't want to get into the details of that. But even if I said, like, the package I showed you, it makes 900 horsepower. We do those exactly the same. I literally took the file off the last one we did and put it on there and didn't change it once, right? So that has cats and all that. And could it be a certified calibration? Possibly, right? It has larger injectors, might make it tough, but it's possible. But, now we have Sema that maybe can help me do that. But I think that access to being able to create those calibrations needs to be done in a way that's not pretty much out of the question for a lot of companies, right? It's not cheap to do, right? So I don't know what it costs to go to the SEMA garage, but is $10,000 sound right, or like somewhere in that range? Or
I mean, the garages are publicly open in terms of like what it costs to go do an emissions, EO certification. That I don't know.
Yeah, and I think it depends, right? How quickly you can do it. If you didn't do it on the first time, it's going to cost you more money. But I was told somewhere in that $10,000 range, right? So now I've got a package that I sell for X amount of dollars, and out of that huge amount of money, I make a few $1,000s on that package maybe. So now you can go, well, I can have a certified calibration for after I sell 4 or 5 of these, right? So for somebody like me who does a lot of volume, that package is really popular.
Yeah.
That's not a out of the question pass. But there's very few people like us that do things in enough volume where they come out with a package and they sell 50, 100, 200 of those a year, right? Whipple sells thousands a year. So the budget for them is not really as much of a factor as it is for even, I had this conversation about people, about other supercharger companies like ProCharger. They're very big, right? And they're very well-run company. I love dealing with them. And if anybody else besides Whipple has the budget to do what Whipple's doing, ProCharger does. So now the question is, can they do that? Do they have that access? Can they call the guy Whipple uses to do it? Or is Ford, because there's a lot of, I don't want to go into it because I get told things I can't always repeat, but there's a lot of politics going on
I'm sure there is,
with the access from Ford in a way that is a little contradictory to what you said earlier as far as like Ford wants that stuff to happen. It sounds like there's some players in that space that are wanting everything to come back to Ford, right? Like being locked into Ford performance, handling the tuning and all that. And like,
Well, you're describing a world we live in without any kind of regulation for access.
right.
Right. I mean, and that's what happens. And that happened in diagnostics too, by the way, is without any kind of right to repair, right to modify that has clear rules of the game and engagement for OEMs and industry, you get whatever you get, right? And that's no way to scale. That's no way to grow a business because let's just say you have a partnership with an OEM and you're getting calibration information, and then that person retires. You might be done the next day.
Right.
You have no idea, right? So if we can get to a point where we have clear rules of engagement on access, then like I can invest in this because I know that it's going to return. It's going to be around for the long run. And without any of that, like that would make me nervous too, to say, all right, I'm going to bank this on a relationship with an OE. And I've got a lot of long-term OE relationships, but I also know people retire, people move on to different roles, and the next person comes into that role and then they have a different mission, a different objective, different friends, whatever the case is.
It's even sometimes personality.
They can save money. They don't like you, absolutely. I mean, I think that's the way the world works a lot of times, but without any kind of rules of engagement for the tuning industry or for customization, this is the problem we have, right? This is the world we live in.
Yeah, and that's something I would like to see, and I don't know if it's possible, but like a commercial version of right to repair, right? Mm-hmm. So Whipple has the right ins to get their stuff done. Everybody needs to have the access to that, right? So if Whipple can do it, then if you're ProCharger or Vortec or me or whatever, here's exactly, if you want to get to this, here's your path to that, and you have just as much availability to that as possible. Now you have to be the right, company has to have the right certifications or whatever credentials to do it, but it's not like, oh well, I don't know that guy. Like that doesn't sound very good to me. So let's bring up Sema and you running for the board. So what led into your decision to want to do that?
Well, I've been going to the Sema show for 20 years now, and I've always liked Sema and just the industry that it represents. It's everything. It's not just racing and performance. It's everything aftermarket. And so as I've gotten involved with all these right to repair and advanced vehicle diagnostics, I started having conversations with Sema early on to say, hey, there's right to repair laws. Why don't you get involved in this? And initially, and this goes back probably a decade, the answer was, well, that's repair and we're modify, so we're not interested. But then it became clear at some point to them that they are connected, right? I mean, it's not just repair by itself or customize and modify by itself. It's the same legislators. It's the same vehicle technology. So Sema has started to get engaged and pretty heavily engaged in the last 3 or 4 years related to ADAS systems and advanced vehicle technology. And, the reason I want to get involved at a board level is because I want to help steer the strategy of where Sema's headed with this, because tactically, okay, you can see certain activities happening, but what's the strategy? We talked, at length over the problems that you see in performance racing, and there's other parts of Sema membership, like lifting trucks. Big problem right now because all the camera and blind spot and 360 systems stopped working. So,
I didn't even think of that.
Oh yeah, lifting and lowering. And Sema just put out a white paper with SAE on a truck, the Silverado that they raised. And while in that one single test case, the vehicle still functioned, it functioned differently, right? Because you've moved sensors, and so I really think that Sema has the opportunity here to open some of those front doors again for us. And I want to be involved in it. And I have enough connections within other parts of the industry that I think I can provide value for them, not just sitting on a board and like voting on things, but like, hey, let's connect these pieces. And so that's why I want to jump in. And it's, an election for a board member, like I'm kind of the guy in the back, right? I'm usually not out in the front promoting myself. And so it's a little bit strange to have an election and go through that. But I'm motivated to get through this and win because I see the cause. And, it's like, you're just like me. I think like cars are our life at the end of the day, right? Like you wouldn't leave this career and go into medical or right. Like it's automotive. So I want to protect that for myself and for my kids. And I want to see the effort that I put into things benefit not just me. I feel better about myself if I can like invest my energy into something that goes farther.
Yeah. One thing I would like to see from Sema is somebody, and maybe there's somebody there. I'm not very involved in Sema. I don't think we're a current member. I have been a member of Sema, and we should be a member of Sema. And
yeah, you got to get your membership.
I got to be able to vote for you, so I got to renew that. But I feel like it would benefit having a representative for guys like me and below, like I wouldn't say below me, but like people that are not as far advanced in their career in this, like a normal performance shop doesn't even think of Sema, right? People like me think of Sema. You mentioned Justin at VMP was at a thing that you did, and he's very involved in Sema. I know he's used Sema Garage. So there's that level of company that is somewhat involved or very involved in Sema. But the average performance shop, zero involvement with Sema.
Right. But on the same hand, like if you were to name a network of industry like that everybody knows, like give me 3 names besides Sema.
That's like Sema?
Yeah, like that powerful, that big, that far reaching.
Well, I'll bring this up because I was going to ask you earlier, but like you brought up AutoCare.
Yeah.
I should know what that is. I don't know what that is. Is that a Sema type organization?
AutoCare used to be called AAIA, and I think they're best known for the Apex show.
Okay.
So, but AutoCare is like Sema, but focused more on non-performance, non-modification. They have some performance and modification, but it's more like aftermarket parts and aftermarket repair. And but there's sort of a sister institute that has a wide network of people. But I mean, like to me, those are the big players. And like if you were going to run a Super Bowl commercial to consumers and say like, customization of your vehicle, like the Sema brand is really strong. A lot of consumers have heard of Sema and the Sema show. And so I think it has untapped potential to influence automakers and vehicle design in the future. Like we want vehicles to be designed so they can be customized.
Yeah.
And consumers can only vote with their wallets, right? And that's not a leading indicator, that's a trailing indicator. So when you've done something wrong as a car maker, like maybe you made the Mustang so it couldn't be modified. Maybe that's going to show up 2 years later in your sales reports as like, well, how come we're not selling? And long investigations. But Sema can come in on the front, activate repairers, consumers, and say, look, this is what we want. Give us what we want. And it's such a strong voice.
Yeah, and I do agree. And it's obviously everybody in this business knows who Sema is. I guess what I'm getting at is I would like there to be a way where those types of companies feel more like they belong.
Yeah, more engaged.
With that. Like I said, I've never been to Sema. I've always gone to PRI. That's been more my.
Well, you should go to Sema. Let's start there.
Yeah. Well, I know, it's always been like, oh, I'm going to go this year, and then
look at me. I'm not even on their board, and I'm recruiting for them.
Yeah, you already got a new member and show participant or show person showing up. But yeah, I just think that they could, and it wouldn't take much. It would just take, one or two people that are a little bit more focused on that grassroots, I guess I'd call it grassroots performance, not the multi-million-dollar companies.
Yep.
The smaller people that feel like they could have a voice at Sema, where they're not like, And I'm not saying SEMA is like ignores those people. I think they would love to have those people there.
I think they're trying, and like they've created individual memberships now. So as an individual person, you can become a SEMA member. They have different councils that focus on different things, whether it's truck and off road or racing and performance, and they have a fair amount of activism. And it's mainly regulatory to say, hey, we need you to write your senator or show up at this rally because they're gonna like when there was mandates for everybody to switch to EV. Like some states were going to mandate you must only sell electric vehicles after a certain year. SEMA became very engaged to say, look, you should have a choice in powertrain. Like, why does the government get to decide if it's EV or not when the free market should really decide? You know, you set the standards for emissions, but then the free market should decide how to meet those standards. So they've been doing a lot of that, and I think that there's unlimited potential for them to grow, like you said, and engage more people. And you know, I know some of the board members at SEMA, and you get a mix of people from big companies, well-known brand names, and then people who come really from the grassroots. And I think that the potential here is on the grassroots side and getting more engagement, because if we want to move big boulders with car companies, we need a lot of momentum from a lot of places to do it. It's not as simple as a phone call. Hey, let's make a law that there's going to be a right to customize. It's actually probably going to have to be what's called a referendum, which is a public vote. That's how right to repair happened. In the state of Massachusetts, they had a public vote on right to repair. Once in, I think it's 2012, and once in 2020. And they had to run commercials and get shops and consumers engaged, but that was in one state, right? So if SEMA takes us on a national level, there you go. Like now is the opportunity to bring in voices of voters who are going to vote for a referendum to make this thing happen. And I mean, like if I were to pick like any organization I think could do this, it would be them.
So yeah, I think a lot of people see SEMA as a big organization that helps at a large level, like almost like some people look at government. Like it has good things, but it's not really servicing them, or it's not like they don't have any resources there that are really for them. And and I'm talking like small shops, 3, 4, 5,000 square feet shops that are local only. They may not be internet businesses, and those outnumber people like me and BMP and other people that may be more involved. But they're probably just as important or more important because there's so many more of them. And I don't know the answer to that. But I would like the average guy to have a more positive view of SEMA. Not that they have a negative view. It's more just they don't really have an opinion of it. I'm talking.
Yeah. So there's brand awareness for it, right? But then, like, what is it doing for me? Is
and
interesting.
And I think they could do a lot of things for those people, and things are already in place. So I guess to me that messaging needs to be more out there.
Okay.
And I think that one way to do that is social media runs the world, right?
Yeah.
But guess how many times I see SEMA in any of my social media? Not much. I just don't see as much awareness out there. Like you said, everybody knows SEMA, but like I never the biggest impact I've seen SEMA have in that type of conversation is the RPM Act that they were doing, or I don't know if that's dead or what. And they got a lot of people out there trying to push that, like, oh, we need this to help us, even though, that really wasn't exactly going to solve the problem. It at least is a step in the right direction.
You have to take baby steps, but yeah.
So that's a good example, right? Like when that was happening, or the hot topic, I think that needs to happen
just more
regularly, and on more topics, and getting people like me involved. I have a big YouTube channel. There's a bunch of those out there. Like, I think they need to get more involved with that type of messaging, right? Like make SEMA an everyday conversation, right? Because that's what's going to help us solve these problems. Yet the average guy, it's not really being talked about. But I hear all the time, like SEMA does this, and like the garage, and there's so many things involved with SEMA, insurance and things that you could use them for, that I just don't think it's.
I think that's great
utilized.
feedback, to give to SEMA is okay, maybe the messaging is not reaching all levels of all the value of the organization.
Yeah, and it doesn't really take a huge amount of manpower from SEMA. It's getting their network of influencers. Really, I hate using that word because there's a lot of negativity attached to that, but there's a lot of positivity
Yeah.
attached to that. Like, you know, I can name 5 or 10 YouTubers in any space that are hugely influential in a good way, right? Like on any topic,
Yeah.
right? Like I teach myself to do all sorts of things on YouTube, and people do the same thing with cars. So now all of a sudden, like Cletus McFarlane, he's one of the top guys out there.
Yep.
Is he talking about SEMA? No. Do we want to hear a commercial about SEMA every day? No. But there's somewhere in between to just get the ball rolling to like everybody cheering SEMA on. Like, save us, SEMA. Let's do like where people are like, oh yeah, that's that one show, and they do cool stuff, and like they want to go to the show. Like
Yeah.
everybody wants to go to the show. But I don't think people realize how powerful of an organization it is and can be if we all rally behind them. You know what I mean? So
I agree. Yeah. I guess I'm seeing it more for like what I think it can become, right?
yeah.
And they certainly have done a lot for our industry, but again, like going back to what's the one organization that could do this, right? And the brand that people have heard of, like it feels like it's SEMA.
No, I agree 100%, and that's why I'm giving you that feedback because I
Yeah,
feel like
appreciate
it's
that.
there and it's already doing great things for many, many companies. But there's a next level of awareness, and not only awareness of the brand, but awareness of what they're doing for us every day.
Yeah, it's
And
great feedback.
I can't even answer that necessarily, but if you get on the board, we can talk more, and I can talk more about it, and more people will talk about it, and help get things actually accomplished.
I see that as the mission for SEMA, the right to modify and customize. That they can serve that more than anybody else could.
Yeah. All right. Before we wrap it up, I always like to talk a little bit about personal stuff. So, what do you do? What do you do when it's not car related? I think you do airplane stuff, don't you? Are you a pilot?
Yeah, I got involved in flipping airplanes, and I got a pilot's license. Gosh, it was maybe 12 years ago, and then like immediately, I didn't even have my license, and I'm like, I found a good deal on a plane, and it's like I flipped cars, and airplanes are just like cars, except they can't break down on the side of the road. It's
Right.
so I started with one plane and then another one, and like you just kind of work your way up. And so now when I find them, it's typically like a plane that is maybe out of maintenance. So it's been sitting for a year or two, not too long. You don't want it too long, but a couple of years maybe it's been sitting. And so I have a mechanic I work with, and we'll fly down there and we'll get the plane working, running safely, and we do what's called a ferry permit. We pull, and then we fly it home. A ferry permit means it's mostly working.
Mhm.
Like
Right.
you can keep the blue side up, and the engine's running, and you swing the gear, and then we fly them home, and then we fix them up, and then I just kind of fly them around while they're in maintenance. And after you fix a plane, you don't want to sell it. Like after it's been sitting 2 years, you want like some good history on it. So
Yeah.
it's my opportunity to fly it for a couple of years and put some time on it, and then I'll turn around and sell it and get another one. And it's been really fun. And I think my favorite story is I buy planes at auction, and they're like sight unseen. And so you have to buy them for like parts value. And I bought a plane down here. It was maybe 4 years ago, and it was one of El Chapo's planes.
Oh wow.
So he had bought it. He wasn't in the plane, but there's a story on his pilot getting arrested. They bought this plane. It's like this fast twin turboprop. I'm sure what he was going to use it for. So they got seized at the border, and went to auction. And then here I am. It's like, yeah, this is. So we bought it, flew it home, fixed it up, and it was on the market like 1 minute because like everybody wanted to have El Chapo's plane. So
That's great. That's a great story. Yeah, that to me that's a super interesting like side hustle to have. And I'm sure you make money at it, but it's more just for the fun of it too.
yeah,
Like you
it's like not a career.
right.
Like I don't think I could scale with it. I definitely couldn't because there's not that many on the market. And you win some, you lose some. The goal is to be net positive and get some flying time in, and just have fun. So it's positive, but it's also a small fraction of my time just because, running Opus and the daily work stuff and, family and kids and cars in the garage and everything else, they all compete for time.
Yeah, and I find it interesting that you've taken something like that on and you flip cars too sometimes, you say? I noticed
Yeah,
that on your
oh my
Facebook a
gosh,
lot. I'm like, what is he doing with that car, or this car, or that car? And, I just find that that's why I wanted to ask you about it, because I'm like, I would think he's so busy. Like, why is he messing with that?
It only took a minute for me to realize everything I put on Facebook Marketplace goes to my friend feed because
Right.
it's like it started with simple cars, and then like I had a moment where I went through like the collector car series, and I was like, I would buy them on Craigslist and sell them at Barrett Jackson or meet 'em or bring a trailer. So I probably transacted 50 or 60 cars through the big auction houses selling them and stuff, and it was fun, but not super profitable and risky because when you go into most auctions, it's whatever it goes for, and like I've made great money, I've lost money. Like I flipped Davey Allison's NASCAR. And like I took the opportunity to take it to McDonald's before I sold it and drove it around a little bit. It was like one of his race winning cars, and I bought it for a great price, and I'm like, I'm going to make a killing on this. And I sent it to Barrett Jackson, and the economy's a little down that month, and I lost a ton of money. So it's, you kind of win or lose, but I've done garbage trucks, fire trucks, school buses. When COVID hit, I bought 18 school buses, like all in a week from a school district. 'Cause I got them for like $600 each.
Oh, wow.
Like 2012, 2014 model year buses. And I just bought them all. And then we had to get them home and put new batteries in them because they all had bad batteries. And then over COVID, it was kind of a fun side hobby is I would have, they're called schoolies, people who buy buses and live in them. And when COVID hit, like they came out of the woodwork. And so every couple weeks, somebody would fly in, they'd buy a bus from me. I'd send them on their way. I made sure they were all mechanically sound. And, I put some miles on them myself to just ensure that they were, because like one couple they flew from Washington and they brought all the money they had, they got on the bus and they headed south. I'm like, all right.
That's so funny. I've never played much with that. I bought 2 cars from Copart at the same time, not on purpose, and it didn't go that great. I did it online. It was in Georgia, I think, and it was a GT 500 that had a front impact, and I was stupid because I should have had somebody go look at it or went there myself. But I was like, I hope the engine's okay. And then while I was waiting for that auction, an F100 came up. And I started bidding on that, and it had a reserve.
Yeah.
And then it didn't hit the reserve, and I didn't think too much about it. And then I won the GT 500, and I probably went a little higher than I should. I got sucked into the whole auction thing. We were all standing around the TV in there, and I'm like, I was battling one specific person, and I out of some country, probably some shill bidder or something. And I'm like, whatever, I want this car. And then I won it. And then the next day I get an email saying, you won. And I'm like, yeah, I know I won. And they're like, no, you won the F100. They decided to take the lower than the reserve. So I'm like, I didn't really want that. But I actually doubled my money on that.
Nice.
And then the GT 500 got here, and the crank pulley had gotten hit. It wasn't like total loss. I still have the car because I decided to keep the shell to make a real GT 500 race car out of it.
Nice, yeah.
But I was able to rebuild the engine and make money on that and the transmission and a few other things. But I'm like, yeah, this didn't work out. Like, I think I probably broke even,
Yeah, I've done some Copart cars, and they're really tough because more and more there's so many sellers and buyers on there, and I have gotten an awful lot of Copart cars with bad engines that said runs and drives.
Yeah.
And it's like it shows up and it's knocking. It's like, oh God, like so I feel like it has become a little bit of a place where people go send cars that have problems. Doesn't mean they're all like that, but I've certainly had more cars show up with unexpected mechanical traumatic failures, engine and transmission, than anywhere else that I've bought in cars.
Yeah, I like to. There's a few YouTubers that do that kind of often. They buy Copart cars, and I love watching those videos because I'm going to be like, I want to be like, how did this guy get screwed? I want to see where he messed up. I don't know. I guess that's a little dark way to look at it. I want to see how this guy got ripped off. Anyway, so what other kinds of hobbies do you get into? Are you so busy working and running the company? Is it pretty much either cars or?
All sorts of I'm always going, and So my wife and I, we live on a farm
That's what I was going to
in
ask you. You said
Dexter,
you got
Michigan.
18 school buses home. I'm like, well,
Yeah,
we
so
must have a big
we
property.
live on 70 acres.
Okay.
Our pole barn is bigger than our house, which it should be, right? It's like every car guy wants a couple lifts in a pole barn.
Is that the same area you started in?
I grew up in St. Louis.
Oh,
So
okay.
then, I lived here for a while and then I went up to Michigan and I moved around a bit. So we're
Okay.
pretty settled in Dexter. And so we live on a farm. She's putting together a winery and a vineyard. So she's been planting grapes and we're getting ready to do a tasting room construction. And I love construction. I built my last house, well, 2 houses ago, I designed it and built it myself. And then the house we live in was 120 years old and I gutted it and redid it. And I think it's kind of like cars in a way. Like when you work on a car, you're going to get bloody and it's going to, like when you're in the middle of it, it's like a bad experience half the time. But
Right.
then like when you're done and you get to drive that car, you're like, man, I did that. It's like
Yeah.
that sense of satisfaction that sometimes running a company, I don't get satisfaction from a project for 9 months or ever, but I can go build a wall. I could frame a wall up and put drywall on. I'm like, look at that wall. It looks great, right? And
No, I'm the same way. It's just, I guess, that's a good thing. That's what makes us human is like, at the end, you have something to reflect on and go, and if it was hard, it makes it better, right? If it was easy, it's like, well,
oh yeah, the
anybody
harder
could.
it is,
Yeah.
like
When you finish it's
the
better.
more I want to get it done, and the better I feel about it when it's done. And it doesn't matter like how much blood is on me. Like I'm gonna feel good about that. I might not want to do it again tomorrow, but I'm gonna feel good about that. And I like that. And it's like whether it's projects on the farm at home or kind of anything I can get into. I just love mechanics.
Creating things,
Yeah.
whether even if it's something simple like a wall or more complex like a tool, like a tuning tool. I mean, that's the same way I am. I like just taking on something new and like figuring it out. Like for a long time, I wanted to get into CAD and learning how to design
Yeah,
things. And, I looked into like some schooling for it and all that, and I just couldn't do it. But then I went and bought a 3D printer,
Yep. Hmm.
got free Fusion 360, and I'm like, I have no idea what I'm doing. But I'm at the point now where I'm designing parts and,
Yeah.
doing a lot of projects with that stuff. And to me, that's the most fun thing because you basically, there's nothing existed and then
Yeah.
you thought
It's
of
such
something.
a feeling to like create something, right? And
Right.
I had never been involved in patents, and then one day we got sued for patent infringement, and it kind of changed my view on intellectual property and the patent system. So from that day forward, every time like an idea came to me that was like, we're going to go do this, I'm personally going to do this, or Opus or Drew's going to do this, we're going to file a patent. So last year I crossed 100 patents.
Oh, wow.
That I filed that I'm the named inventor on, and most of them are work. There's like ADAS patents and all sorts of different things. But like I've got some personal ones too. Like I like to play drums, and I'm like, wouldn't it be cool if I could put accelerometers in drumsticks, and I could data log my drum performance basically, and I could look at how many calories I burned, and see if I was on time or off time. So I'm like, I'm gonna go patent that, and then like I got a patent on drumsticks now. So like
That's awesome. Like that's
random
totally
stuff.
random.
Yeah.
Did you do anything with that, or just you got the patent with it? Or
I got the patent about a year and a half ago, and I've been kind of waiting to see how VR and AR could play into it before I go develop a product, because I think that there's probably a tie-in and maybe a continuation of that to do something. But frankly, I have the skills to go design that product and go to market, but like that's kind of where it goes from hobby to job. And
I saw a product that they may be violating your patent. It was
All right.
a set of like ghost drumsticks that I think had a set of headphones, and you play the air drums.
really,
And
that could be, yeah.
they might have accelerometers in them. So there you go.
Well, that's the one rule I've always had with patents is I'm never going to be a troll. And so when I file a patent, it's an idea I have that I want to go make. Sometimes it's filing a patent or trying to tells you your idea is not going to work, right? Or a
Right.
bad idea. Like I'm kind of obsessed with sleep, like good quality sleep, and like I measure and monitor myself, and I've had sleep apnea, and so have you ever woken up from like you wake up, your alarm goes off, and it's like playing music or something, and then you go back to sleep, and then like you're dreaming about it.
Yeah, yeah.
Like so, like I'm like I want to write a patent and come up with an innovation that you can alter sleep state. So like we can detect when you're in REM, and then we can play like music or sounds or something, and like trigger dream events. And I'm like, this would be so cool. So I go to write a patent. Somebody's already got it. I'm like, oh my god,
Oh, wow.
somebody else thought of it. And they never went to market, but it was just filed like 5 years ago. So maybe we're going to see like, we're starting to see earbuds that help you sleep. And like the next iteration would be, okay, like what if you could play familiar voices or memories or trigger things to happen when you're in the REM state of sleep, which is where this would all occur. But so I had this idea. I was all excited for, a couple weeks, and then the patent attorneys do a search, and they're like, "Look at this," and I'm like, "Yeah, all right, on to the next thing."
Yeah. So is that called lucid dreaming?
Yeah.
Because recently watched a video about that, and I never really thought much about it. But then I'm like, that's happened to me before, like just by chance. These people were trying to do it on purpose.
Yeah, they're trying to like stimulate. How can we? Because think about how much of your life is in sleep state. So what if you could then sort of alter or improve your sleep state experience?
Yeah, I just had something like that happen like 2 days ago. I think it was like me and my wife went to bed early. We were watching TV in bed, and I fell asleep, and then I woke back up, and then I dozed back off. But like, I had this super weird dream, and like my mind like invented this whole thing, but I was like slightly awake. But I'm like, I couldn't have been awake because where did that thought
and
come?
Like whatever was playing on the TV possibly altered what you were
Probably.
dreaming about.
And I thought about it. I'm like, where did I come up with that? And like, I think that's the lucid dreaming thing that they're talking about. And it made me like kind of excited. I'm like, that was cool. Like really, really cool. So, a way to actually harness that and make it happen on demand would be pretty cool. So anyway, I think we're going to wrap it up. We got a good time in. I really appreciate you coming, Brian.
Thank you for having me.
Great luck at Sema, and hopefully we can keep in touch on that and make Sema a household name in the performance business.
Awesome. I appreciate everything. Thanks.
All right. Thanks, Brian.